bulls at grass can be tricky at the best of times, and certainly this year they've been extremely tricky. I've spoken to a few farmers that said that bulls were later going to grass, and bulls have been generally unsettled. So look, if the weather starts to get a bit changeable again in the next number of weeks, chances are these bulls will get restless, do a lot of walking around the ditches, probably not doing a great thrive, and then you really have to consider, look, it's time to get these into the shed.
Hello and welcome to The Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and this week Teagasc Beef Specialist Aidan Murray discusses beef management tips for the month ahead. Aidan, you're very welcome. There are a number of management tips and key advice as we move into August. For farmers that are autumn calving, how should cows be managed pre-calving, and what should farmers be looking out for?
Well, I suppose there's a couple of things at the moment, Catherine, that we really need to be on the lookout for. First of all, are the cows in good enough condition? And probably at this time of year, if they've been dried off a while and they're been on decent grass, it's to make sure that they're not in over condition. So just monitor the condition, and maybe if we can keep cows that are a wee bit maybe overfit, keep them a wee bit tighter without trying to punish them too severely. But don't be allowing cows to get overfat. That's probably number one. The second thing is it's probably worthwhile looking at the sort of, do the cows need any type of a pre-calver, whether it's in the form of a bolus or in the form of licks, or or a drench or whatever, just to get minerals into them. And in particular, I'd be thinking about making sure that iodine levels and that our copper levels and that are good in cows, because in the past I've certainly seen cows that have started to calve in the autumn time, and farmers will report that either the cows are a wee bit slow to calve, or the calves were born quite easily and maybe took a gasp of breath and just had no fight in them. So oftentimes, that can be related to minerals, and just make sure that the mineral status, because cows that have been at grass won't have received any additional minerals unless you've bolused them or dosed them or made licks available. So that's worth looking out for. And then the other risk this year, and it'll be a risk right up until mid-September if the weather was to stay mild, would be the risk of summer mastitis in cows. And just, when you're herding the cows, keep an eye out for the one that's lying away from the group. Make sure you get them up and raised, because cows that are showing signs of that often get stiff on the back legs. A quarter will be swollen and that. So, if you can take cows in every couple of weeks, put a bit of fly treatment along their backs to keep flies off them. Maybe some lads use garlic licks, some of them use the fleck drawn tags, and that just to keep the fly population off the cows and stop quarters being infected, because cows that do pick it up can, rise the temperature very quickly. They can go off colour quickly, and oftentimes there's a lot of work involved in stripping the quarters out and treating them with antibiotics. And even at that, you more than likely, 9 cases out of 10, you'll lose the quarter. So those are probably the key couple of things that I'd be looking out for in the next few weeks with regards to those autumn calvers.
Some key advice there, Aidan. On most spring calving herds, the bull has been removed by now. What are the key management tips for these herds in the coming weeks?
Yeah, there is people that get into the idea that they'll set a date, whether it's the 15th of July or the 1st of August or whatever it might be, to remove the bull, to sort of tighten up the calving and remove late-born calves. And these later-born calves, particularly in a weanling system, are probably, they're more problematic because they're going to be well behind calves that were born earlier in the spring. And then if you're in a system where you're looking to sell weanlings at the back end of the year, you just physically, they're not there long enough on the farm to get decent weight on them. So it's a good policy if you can implement it. But I suppose, look, if the bull has come away in the last month, it's probably, within 4 weeks or after 4 weeks of the bull being removed, ideal opportunity to try and scan these cows. Gives you a handle on what's not in calf, and how to manage those for the next while. Also gives you an idea of how compact the calving's going to be next spring, and when the heavy workload's going to be, when the bulk of the cows are going to be calving, so that you're set up properly. And the other thing, I suppose, is that if you can do them before they're 12 weeks in calf, 14 weeks in calf, the scanner has a very, very good likelihood of being able to pick up cows carrying twins. And those are cows that'll be under the most pressure on the run up to calving next spring. Probably need to be singled out and looked after for a bit of extra attention so that they calve down in decent condition and they don't take too much out of themselves and try and get in order to try and get them back in calf next year again. So scanning definitely has a lot of advantages, and ideally once the bull's gone 30-35 days, you should pick up the vast majority of the cows at that stage. So, and it's better done probably earlier in the season than later if you can.
And for cows that are picked up empty at this stage, Aidan, what's the best option, to sell them now live or to feed on and to finish them?
Well, I suppose, look, if you identify it early on, you give yourself a few options. You could wean them a wee bit earlier and start to feed them. And that some of the cows will be carrying enough flesh, even carrying the calf, that they could be sold fat directly at weaning time. And that, so it's really about cows with condition. If you're gonna maximize the value of the cow when it comes to selling, particularly going to the mart, obviously cows with flesh are going to be worth more than cows that are going to need additional feeding. So you make the decision: can you get more flesh on them before you would be planning to sell? And that might mean sort of feeding them a couple of kilos a meal, getting the calves off them in the next month, feeding them through September, and then looking to get rid of them directly off grass. And that, will lessen the sort of silage demand. Other farms that maybe have a component of autumn calving may be reluctant to sell cows that are empty and just sort of say, look, we'll roll them over and what I call try and get them in calf to calve in the autumn again next year as opposed to next spring. There's obviously a cost associated with that, but it's an individual own decision if that's what they want to do. But if you are going to sell them to the factory or live at the mart, which a lot of the smaller herds would do, just make sure there's flesh on them in order to maximize the value. And all summer there, the cow trade and the dry cow trade has been extremely good. And some of these heavier 650 up to 800 kilo cows have been making very, very good money.
And are there any implications, Aidan, for selling cows or even weanlings in relation to SCEP, the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme?
Well, I've just had a few queries in the last week where people that have met the requirement with regards to calving under SCEP, the 50% requirement, have sort of come and asked, I've got 4 or 5 cows with calves at foot. I'm thinking about selling them now this month. Would that be okay? Surely from a SCEP point of view, the couple of things that you must consider is that, number one, are you okay? If you sell the calves, is it going to leave you short of animals for genotyping? If the calves are over 50 days old, you can weigh them along with the cow and you've ticked that box. But the other option is that there is a rule in there within SCEP that if you sell before the calf is 5 months old, well, then you're leaving yourself open to not being able to complete the data recording element of the program. And the data recording is split into 2 components, both worth 10% of the payment. The first one tends to be around sort of registering the sire, registering the calf, registering the cow milkability, and all which can be done in the first few weeks. But then when it comes to calf docility and calf quality, that's recorded after 5 months. So if you do sell before 5 months, there is a level of penalty there. And probably, if you fall below 80% of the requirement for that task, you'll get a 10% overall penalty. So it'll be worth 10% of your overall payment. Plus there's a 10% penalty on that 10%. So it'll work out at about 11% you would lose if you're not able to complete that second part of the data recording, which is, as I say, is calf quality, calf docility, and that end of it. So that's something that you need to be aware of, and obviously it will have implications with this new beef welfare scheme that's going to be launched in the next week or so, in terms of you're selling a cow with a calf that isn't weaned, so you would have to rule those out in terms of payment whenever that would come along. But yes, you are free to sell them, but you do run the risk of losing out on that second part of the data recording. But your advisor will be able to tell you specifically as to what degree of penalty that you might incur, because if it's less than 20% of your requirement, it's only a pro rata reduction, you wouldn't suffer the full 11%.
That's great, Aidan. It's an important point to remember for farmers that are selling stock at the moment. For farmers that have bulls for finishing at grass at the moment, what options should they be considering?
Well, look, it's bulls at grass are can be tricky at the best of times, and certainly this year they've been extremely tricky. I've spoken to a few farmers that said that bulls were later going to grass, and bulls have been generally unsettled. I was talking to a farmer earlier on this morning that said that he said he pulled bulls in there last week that were born in the spring of 23. Because basically it wasn't happy with the level of thrive, even though he was trying to do a bit of supplementing. So look, if the weather starts to get a bit changeable again in the next number of weeks, chances are these bulls will get restless, do a lot of walking around the ditches, probably not doing a great thrive. And then you really have to consider, look, it's time to get these into the shed, get them weighed if you can, see what weights gain you're going to have to put on, and try and push them hard for 100, 120 days to get them out of the system. But, oftentimes if August is changeable, you have animals that are sort of 16, 17, 18 months of age. They're getting rowdier, harder to handle, and, there's obviously that safety component to having them out. So I would say a lot of bulls, if they're not already housed, you need to consider housing them in the next few weeks and pushing them on feed-wise. No point in having a bull if you're not prepared to push it and push it hard, because you're going to be looking for gains over that finish period, sort of 1.6, 1.8 kilos a day.
And conditions are dry at the moment, Aidan. For farmers that have heifers that they are planning on finishing, what steps should they be taking now to get them finished?
Yeah, well, look, if there's a batch of heifers and you feel that you're going to have good grass in the next for the next 2 months, certainly you would be looking to and can get them finished comfortably off grass. And that there may be a few that, some of the more muscly, if you have more muscly type animals, that might need to come in and get an extra push inside. But you'd imagine that if heifers have been doing reasonably well, carrying a reasonable level of flesh on them, that, about 3 to 4 kilos of concentrate at grass for the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks would be able to finish off a lot of them and have them gone out of the shade. And like the rations needn't be too elaborate. It's more a point of getting a bit of energy, a 3-way mix of barley, distillers, and maybe maize into them to try and boost the energy level. Grass will be loaded with protein at this time of year, so you're really looking to try and boost the energy level in the ration and try and get enough fat cover and flesh on them so that they can be killed off grass. But certainly, once we move into August, if you are planning on doing that, it's time to be considering starting that level of feeding.
Most definitely. Calves on dairy beef farms that are weaned, they're being rotated on grass at the moment. How should they be managed over the coming weeks, and what should farmers be conscious of in the coming weeks?
Probably the big thing with those is, are they continuing to thrive? Have you got good enough quality of grass? Will you need to go in and either continue with a bit of meal feeding or reintroduce meal as we go through the month of August? And the other big thing is, when were the last dosed for worms? Should you take a fecal, a dung sample and get an egg count done? And obviously, there hasn't been an awful lot of coughing and there hasn't been an awful lot of reports of lungworm at this stage. But certainly you'd be suspecting that calves will be starting to pick up bigger worm burdens and more at risk from lungworm if they haven't been dosed consistently. So those calves, you need to be, depending on the product that you're using, but you're talking about probably every 4 to 6 weeks of making sure that they're properly dosed, keeping them on good quality grass and trying to keep their thrive going. And then I suppose as we get into September, if you're going to start a vaccination program with them for pneumonia to keep them covered going into the shed, well, then they might need their first jab and a booster maybe 4 to 6 weeks later, so that they're fully up to their immunity is fully up before they actually go into the shade later in the autumn. But that'll obviously depend on when you're considering. But keep the worm dosing up if you can at all. Try and be guided by the dung sample and the fecal egg counts on them so that you can be more targeted at. But if they are coughing and you think it's lungworm, you just need to go in straight away and treat and make sure that they don't get too caught up with that.
That's great, Aidan. And from speaking with farmers, a lot of their fodder budget completed. Around the country, yields are back on second cut compared to what was expected. What can farmers do now to ensure that they have enough fodder for next winter given the circumstances?
Well, I suppose first and foremost, how are you fixed for next winter? What's in the yard? Is there any possibility of being able to take a third cut, or is there surplus grass coming on stream that you're going to be able to take out in the next few weeks? And just do an assessment in terms of, we've seen some of the advisors out on farms looking at what's in silage pits, how many round bales are there, and then looking at a rough idea of what stock's going to be on farm over the winter, and making a stab as to, are we in surplus or are we in deficit? A lot of fodder supplies were well and truly run down last winter with the very late spring, and it hasn't been an ideal year for growing surplus fodder with the way grass has been tight. So we definitely need to get a handle on what you have available. Then the options are, how can you if you are in deficit, can it be made up with extra silage, an opportunity to dig out extra silage, or is it a case of, look, I'm going to have to move stock to reduce my demand? So, those empty cows that maybe haven't gone back in calf again, those are a key target to try and maybe, if you can, avoid bringing them back into the shade again, because they are the big consumers of fodder. And that, could they be finished and move on before you come in? Have you got store cattle that maybe you'd thought about finishing, but if a proportion of them were sold off, it does two things. It lessens the demand. It also improves the cash flow on farm, and avoids this worry of, am I going to run out of silage next spring? The other thing is, if there is animals coming in for finishing, if you can steer them towards getting them up onto an ad lib diet where their forage requirement is minimal, maybe 10% of their overall dry matter intake, well, then that'll cut your demand for silage as well. And then some people may have neighbours that, have surplus grass there that are not heavily stocked, and there may be an opportunity to take some fields of grass to build up stocks that way. But I think the key thing with all this, Catherine, is, we're into August. How are you going to be fixed? Because the opportunity to take a lot of extra grass, will be limited enough in the next number of weeks.
Most definitely, Aidan, and really the important thing is that there is time now to take action and speak with their local advisor to put a plan in place now for the coming winter.
That is absolutely key.
Also, sourcing straw is an area of concern at the moment for farmers. What steps can they take now at this stage, or are there alternatives available that they could consider?
Well, look, I suppose that there is there's a couple of issues. How available is straw going to be, and if it is available, at what price? And that those are probably the main concerns. Most people would have a fair idea of the amount of straw that they use year on year. Possibly it could be an very expensive feed for trying to stretch out fodder supplies, which people would have done in normal years. But certainly as a bare minimum, what are you going to need? Whether it's for lambing down ewes, whether it's for the calving area, for the creep areas, how much straw are you going to need to keep those areas well covered and clean once cows start to calve down, and calves need creep areas or whatever. What we have seen, in order to cut down on the requirements, is that particularly with calf creep areas, and that is that fellas can put down a bit of rubber or just scrape the concrete in the creep area onto the slats at least twice a day, where the floor is sloped towards, to try and cut down. The other thing, I suppose, is if is there a level of wood chip available that you can put under the straw, or put on a creep area that calves can lie in? That very good, very free draining, and that even with straw on top of it, from a calving point of view, there's less problems with cows slipping and stuff like that. So that will certainly reduce your demand for straw. If you can get something like wood chips to be able to put on, the issue is you need to be able to let them rot well down then, either by putting them out on a field that you plan to plough. Not ideal to be spreading with your normal dung after 6 months on grassland, because they just don't break down quick enough. So those are areas, in that creep area, can you use a bit of lime or sand or whatever for calves to lie on if straw is going to be difficult? But because it is, some farmers actually put in sort of like a wooden slat on blocks where the calves can go back and lie on top of that and then just scrape under it. The calves are lying quite happy to do it after 2 or 3 weeks, and it's scraped down, but the calves are always lying on the dry, which is actually essential. So look, you need to suss out how difficult straw is going to be to get, and then obviously how much you can afford to buy based on the price of it. But we should be looking to, from a calving and a lambing point of view, that the bare minimum is there to make sure that those areas are kept bedded, because it'll cut down on disease risk and everything when it comes to next spring.
That's great, Aidan. Some great tips and advice there for the coming weeks. Thanks, Aidan.
You're welcome.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Aidan for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.